Hey, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And apparently living in the age of King Charles. I'm Nick Saveri.
That's right. Unfortunately, the Queen's passing, as we're recording this, obviously, this just broke earlier today with Queen Elizabeth passing away. So our condolences there to the family. Some people don't feel that way. We'll get into that in a second because there's been some stuff I don't want to laugh about. Somebody passing away. On the program today, President Biden's speech last week to the American people raised some eyebrows, even from those in his own party. Nick and I will explain. Plus, a third of a major country here on this planet is underwater. You may not even know about it. The crisis that's happening out in Pakistan, we're going to explain it all. And lastly, in our new segment coming to the show, we're going to call it Dear Can We Please Talk? It's kind of like Dear Ivy, just a little bit browner. First, before I turn to my other brown co-host, I'm a brown guy. He's a brown guy as well. Nick Saveri. A couple housekeeping notes. The NFL season is now underway. You can check out Day to Day, the NFL preview show that I just did over on theanalyst.com. I hosted there with a couple other folks from my day job over at Stats Perform, data analyst, AI data analyst, excuse me. Kyle Cunningham Rhodes joined me, and NFL writer Nicholas McGee. Check out that first episode, a preview of all of week one's action that's happening this coming weekend, and a few teams to watch. One near and dear to me and Nicholas's heart that resides out in the Vegas Strip. So check out that episode on theanalyst.com or wherever you get your podcast. Nick, we were just talking about the Queen passing away. How are you doing, my friend? We just heard this news coming down, but how's everything else over there in Eastern Pennsylvania?
Things are good. The not much to report here. Life is good. We're getting ready for the fall. Obviously got football going on. First game of the season rather. Kicking off with the Rams hosting the Bills. Just excited for the games that come back. Obviously, we're thick of college football too. We were away for Labor Day weekend. So we were in Cape May, where we go now. It's becoming an annual thing. It's just fun. Small town. It's relaxing, just being by the water. So we enjoy it. How about you? How are you all doing?
I'm good, man. Everything we're about to set sail. As we're recording this, you'll be listening to this on a Friday morning. But my wife and I are taking the kids out on a little cruise here on Royal Caribbean out there. Here in Miami, obviously a big destination port, and luckily the Bahamas is not that far away, so you can do like a quick weekend trip. So we'll be on a cruise there. Yes, Mr. Zaveri, raising his hand like we're in class. Yes.
I texted this to you earlier when we were talking about shows. I did want to bring this back up about the program that you're now doing with the analyst.
I appreciate that.
I'm a big fan of intelligent sports talk. And what I mean to say there is something we do at Can We Please Talk? Talk to inform people, and add or search for nuance in news stories, not just the opinions, but really factually what's going on. Sports is a really fascinating time. We're able to do that with the understanding of analytics and the role statistics gets to play. Mike shows a great example of that. I think about this often because I am a fan of ESPN radio. I've listened to it forever. But so many outlets like that, Mike, are just producing just boring and very trite, what I would call like coffee and bagel sports talk. It's very simplistic. It's not adding a lot of nuance. In an age right now, where as I'm talking to all of you folks, I'm paying attention to the NFL game because I'm on DraftKings. So I am very much a gambler these days. Not very much, but I love to play a little bit, add a little action. But I'm not going to go. Where am I going to go to get information that feeds me as a gambler, as someone who has that additional level of interest in the game? I also play fantasy football. I'm certainly not going to go to listen to some blathering folks talk about, well, back in my day, I did this, or, if you look at the play, it does that. No, I want stats. I want informed people. Mike's show, combine that with just great gambling analysts out there, gives you the information we want to know. That's 21st century sports talk. Again, shameless plug. I'm a huge fan of Mike's program. But more importantly, I'm a huge fan of intelligent sports talk. And Mike, I thank you for you and what everyone at the analyst is doing about bringing that level of discourse to a place that often doesn't seem as welcoming a place for that level of nuance. So good job on you guys.
Well, we appreciate that. I was going to clip all of that out because it was long-winded, but then you got to it and you said that you liked the show and you plugged the folks over at the analyst. So now it stays for the people that are like, cut it out. No, it'll be in there. No, thank you. We truly are, we started the analyst back in 2020 during the pandemic. And, the company I work for, Stats Perform, has such a rich history of sports data that it's so easy to tell stories when there's no sports on with these stats and insights and historical stuff, putting videos together, images, whatever it is. So they've done a great job over at the Analyst, and they've allowed me to create some content over there. So shout out to them. I wanted to tell you a quick funny story before we get into our first segment and President Biden's speech last week, because there's a bunch of directions that we're going to go in that first segment. But piggybacking on that, the midterms are coming up. Obviously, we all know that we're doing our live show in DC in October. We're going to be discussing the midterms. We're going to have a bunch of great guests on. But I got a phone call yesterday, and one of those robo calls here. We'd love to know about topics, holding issues that are important to you. And as the person's asking me these questions, I'm waiting for the buzzwords, right, to kick in so that way I know who they're, canvassing for lack of a better term, or doing the phone bank stuff for. And then finally they get to it. They're like, "Can I ask you, do you agree with Charlie Chris's socialist agenda?" And as soon as I heard that, I said, "Oh, that is funny." And the questions, it was clear as day that it was somebody calling from DeSantis's or maybe it was an independent one, but the questions were very geared towards Governor DeSantis, where I live down in Florida. So I just thought that was so funny. Some of these questions, and you could hear in the other person's voice, they didn't want to read this script because the questions on there are loaded, right? And the buzzwords are part of it. So I just thought that was funny. I wanted to share that with you because I'm sure you've gotten that in Pennsylvania, some robocalls there asking you Dr. Oz related questions.
We have, but what's funny about polling now, Mike, is that it's becoming, I really like what you just said. It is very buzzword driven.
Yeah.
And maybe you and I, because we do this show and reread, it's funny, man. For any of you folks who are our age, who remember, current events in like school when you were, in third grade, fourth grade, what have you, you have to go home, read a newspaper, clip it out, bring it to school next day, talk about what you read.
Right.
And it's funny because it's one of the earliest forms of media literacy that I can recall. And back then, you'd have your local paper, you'd pull something out, read it for class the next day. Because of this show, it's forced me to read multiple news outlets, and I credit Mike for that. But just in terms of prep for this program, and I think about that with this because when we think of buzzwords, like this is, I get those calls a lot, and like there's a way to do this without going down the road of are you leaning left or right? Like you could ask me straight up,
right?
For Doug Mastrano, he believes X. These are his policies. Scale of 1 to 10, which direction do you side with? Like I just did it there, folks. Very simple. And yes, you can go ahead and hire me for a pollster if you like. It's not that complicated. But when you do have these scripted questions, and I've gotten the same thing too, where I've had people read it and awkwardly pause when they say these things. And you just feel as though you, pollster, don't even believe this stuff.
Right.
So are you working for a party, or is this some kind of objective form of data capture? And it's unfortunate because I don't recall this. This is where we are now, folks. Like,
Yeah.
It wasn't always like this. You'd be able to get a phone call. You'd find out, like, do you know these candidates? Are these topics important to you? These, policy measures important to you? And you could just be able to answer yes or no. And that data could then be collected, aggregated, and then displayed in a way of giving a sense locally of where people are. But now it's, what is your view on critical race theory? Like, right. Is that really the point here?
Right,
like,
right.
We're not making that a policy matter in the state of Pennsylvania. It's silly. But anyway, back to you. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. No, but it perfectly transitions into our first segment because I actually was asked to do some phone banking for the president down here in Florida as well, and I just didn't want to do it because same thing. The script of questions that you're asking, or to somebody out there that you're calling, it just doesn't make it conversational. It makes it feel forced. But let's get into our first segment and President Biden's speech last week. If you don't know what we're talking about, I mean, again, you must have been living under a rock. But President Biden last week gave a speech in Philadelphia, and everyone has been talking about the president's remarks and about destroying democracy, what the MAGA Republicans are standing for. This speech was called "The Battle for the Soul of the Nation." But don't take my words for it. Let's listen to a little bit of what the former president said in his speech last week, if you didn't catch it.
But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country. These are hard things, but I'm an American president. Not a president of red America, blue America. but of all America. And I believe it's my duty to level with you, to tell the truth, no matter how difficult, no matter how painful. And here, in my view, is what is true. MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. And they're working right now, as I speak, in state after state, to give power to decide elections in America to partisans and cronies, empowering election deniers to undermine democracy itself. Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Now, I want to be very clear up front. Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans, are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. I know, because I've been able to work with these mainstream Republicans. But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans.
The president also went on to say in that speech, Democrats, independents, mainstream Republicans, I'm quoting from the speech, we must be stronger, more determined, and more committed to saving American democracy than MAGA Republicans are to destroying American democracy. The president obviously giving this speech, and I'm not sure what was the purpose of the speech. I know the president's been out there campaigning and going to different places like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, talking a little bit about gun reform, different bills, campaigning for people that are up for election in those different key races that are happening in Senate races across the country, House of Representative stuff. I don't mean it in like I don't know what he's doing giving this speech about the soul of democracy. I mean it more in the context of it didn't fall in line with like the rest of the stuff that he was doing in terms of campaigning and going out there and giving speeches, meeting with unions and things like that, and talking about labor laws or what some of the legislation that Democrats have passed into law, what it does for the average American person. So with that, I want to get, Nick, some of your takeaways. But the first thing I wanted to say was the media's coverage of this has been hysterical. And I say that as somebody who not only has worked in the media, still works with media outlets. Just to give you an example, the Washington Post ran 2 opinion pieces a day apart from each other. One says the GOP's reaction to Biden's speech shows that his anti-MAGA strategy is working. The next day, Biden's MAGA speech showed his blatant hypocrisy. How can one outlet run 2 things contrary to each other? And then, as I'm combing through different media outlets, and we've talked about this, and Nick just mentioned it, right? Going through different sources, not just coming to us or coming to, 8 p.m. on a certain channel for all your news and information, going to a bunch of different places. These are some of the clips that we've compiled here. Shout out to our producer, Tim Meehan, of just some of the things that people are saying, Democrats on the side of Joe Biden, about this speech. Take a listen.
The Institute for Strategic Dialogue, which tracks hate speech, said after the Biden speech, there was a surge online in conversations that said Biden's remarks singling out MAGA Republicans were interpreted as a declaration of war against conservatives and all the Trump voters.
The idea that he condemned us was worse than Hillary calling us deplorables, was worse than Obama calling us extremists. He basically called us bad people.
I cringed when Hillary Clinton said basket of deplorables. And I thought, oh, that's not going to help her. That's not going to help us being Democrats. I felt the same way when the president made his comments, because there are extremists in both parties. There are certainly extremists with MAGA. We've seen video of that on January 6th as an example. But you want the whole pie. You don't want just pieces of the pie.
You tweeted Trump stole an election. You tweeted Brian Kemp stole an election. If denying election results is extreme now, why was
so
it
let's be really clear. That comparison that you made is just ridiculous. I have been. Well, you're asking me a question. Yes. Let me answer it.
And you said it was ridiculous.
I was talking specifically at that time of what was happening with voting rights and what was in danger of voting rights. That's what I was speaking to at the time. And here's the thing. I have said Governor Kemp won the election in Georgia. I've been clear about that. I have said President Trump won the election of 2016, and I've been clear about that. What we are talking about right now is, let's not forget what happened on January 6, 2021, when we saw an insurrection, a mob that was incited by the person who occupied this campus, this facility at that time. And it was an attack on our democracy. Let's not forget, people died that day.
All right, so some of those clips, let's give some context for the people because you may not know the voices. One of those folks has been on the show, and another one is actually scheduled to come on the show. But the last one that you just heard there was obviously Peter Doocy from Fox News asking a question to White House Press Secretary KJP. You heard Leslie Marshall there, the former Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor. Nikki Haley, obviously, you heard her there saying that we're just bad people. And then her words, by the way, not mine. And then lastly, in the beginning of the clip was ABC News' Martha Raddatz, and she was hosting or filling in, I believe, on ABC This Week. And she asked that question to the former Atlanta mayor who's now working in the Biden administration. I just thought some of this stuff is hysterical, how it's playing out. And you can see it, just like I mentioned in that Washington Post, how on 2 different days, opinion editorials from 2 different people with 2 different captions, trying to get the clickbait, right, and give really both sides of this argument. But there is no both sides to this argument. We've talked about this all the time. You're allowed to be a Republican. You're allowed to be a conservative. And that's what President Biden said in the speech, right? I read it to you. Democrats, moderates, independents, and moderates meaning Republicans as well. Like, we all have to stand against this, right and wrong. Fair and free elections. You know, I didn't play it in the clip there, Nick, before I let you go. But in the exchange between Martha Raddatz, and she was asking Keisha Bottoms, I believe is her name, the former Atlanta mayor. The mayor said, "Why don't you guys go back and just read the speech? Reread the speech. You don't got to listen to it. Just read the words that are out there." And I'm going to read it to you one more time. This is a nation that believes in the rule of law. We do not repudiate it. This is a nation that respects free and fair elections. We honor the will of the people. We don't deny it. And so I'm with President Biden on this. Again, I don't know why you need to have the speech. We can get to that in a second. But it's more of like, this isn't Republican versus Democrat. This is right versus wrong. There are current people, and we've discussed this on the show, and we've done analysis pieces on it. Carrie Lake, for example, who's up for the Arizona race in Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano, who is defending the January 6th people, right? Calling them prisoners of war. I mean, prisoners of war. You know, the 2016 comparison with Peter Doocy, did anybody storm the Capitol in 2017? Do I remember that? In January 6th of 2017, did anybody storm the Capitol there? Because I don't remember that. I do remember a protest, but I don't remember anybody storming a Capitol building and damaging government property and 5 people dying in subsequent days. I don't recall that. Maybe I'll look it back up. But Nick, I want to get some of your takeaways because this speech has been, I think this has probably been in television terms, if you talk about the A block, right? This is 1A, right behind everything that's happening with Trump and DOJ. And we'll get into that stuff in coming episodes now that we tape twice a week. But just hearing some of the way Democrats are reacting to this speech, it's like, no, we should take the foot off the gas. Well, this is not foot off the gas. This is right wrong, man. This has nothing to do with Democrats, Republicans, just like President Biden said in the speech. This is, I won, just like he won. When he won, we said he was president. Nobody stormed Capitol buildings and nobody did any of that. Like, I want to get some of your takeaways on not only the speech, but the montage there that we played of people on the Democratic side of the aisle, one that's been on this program, talking about President Biden's speech and it being divisive.
Yeah, I mean, divisive is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. It's a brilliant move, actually, by the president for a couple of reasons. You mentioned the states that he visited recently, Pennsylvania. So let's talk about Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania is, for the most part, it's a purple state, but leans red. But ask yourself, when we talk about red, when we talk about Republicans, what kind of Republicans are we talking about? It's not really MAGA Republicans. We know this because right now polling data is telling us that Doug Mastriano, the Republican candidate for governor, continues to fall behind Josh Shapiro, in polling data. it's a state that you have a Republican presence, but what Biden realizes is that the Republican Party is actually fracturing. Now, how do I know this, right? Well, let's just talk very quickly about what we're seeing in some Senate races. And Mike and I've talked offline about this, but there's something that is starting to brew funding wise with where Senate campaign money is going. Recently, it's been pulling out of Arizona, where the current Democratic incumbent looks like he's pulling ahead. Pulling out of Tennessee, out of Pennsylvania, actually, the Senate, the funding, Republican funding support, it's not going to Mehmet Oz. Republicans are starting to realize at the Senate level, some of these far right candidates are looking less and less likely to win. So why do I bring this up? It's because Biden, like myself, like Mike, like a lot of people who've been paying attention to this, recognize that there is a fissure happening in the Republican Party. There's two directions Biden could have gone with that speech. He could have just said, Republicans. He could have said, Republicans, this is a problem in your house that you're not solving. But he didn't do that because he knew what we remember from 2021. Remember the speech that Mitch McConnell gave when he recognized that Joe Biden had won the election. Remember what Mike Pence did. More importantly, what he didn't do, right? In terms of not certifying the results. Joe Biden has been in the Senate long enough and has been, former vice president, now obviously president of the United States, has spent enough time in Washington to recognize that there are enough Republicans to get things done. And at a state level, when you're talking to Republicans, when you refer to MAGA Republicans, first off, what you're doing is you're doing the job of the Lincoln Project, essentially. But you're recognizing that there are members of the party that you can be able to work with. There are members of the party that you can be able to fragment and to say, look, I understand where you stand, but in this upcoming race, the person who represents your state is not going to win or is not necessarily connected to your values. Let's take a look at Wisconsin for a minute, where the incumbent Ron Johnson is actually starting to fall behind the polls. Him and Mandela Barnes, the Democrat candidate, are pretty close at this point. I think it was like 43-43, this split. That's not possible. Wisconsin looked like it was going to go to the incumbent. But obviously Johnson's comments recently about Social Security being up for the vote in Congress every few years, it was political suicide, essentially. But all of this is to say that Biden sees that the fissure of the Republican Party is there. And the smartest thing you can do is just split it. It's just welcome the fact that, hey, there's members of this party I can work with, that I have worked with. And then there's just some psychos on this side that we don't work with, that more importantly are not emblematic of Americans, that more importantly are the same folks who climbed the Capitol steps on January 6th. And it's okay to say that those folks don't represent the Republican Party. And I'm not going to stay here and talk about where I stand on this, because I have my issues with how the Republicans have handled MAGA. In essence, it's basically Frankenstein, and I'll leave it at that. And Biden's smart enough to see that. When you have someone like Leslie Marshall saying, well, you're painting these people a certain way, I really would respectfully push back on that, because I think it's okay to do that. Because if you split the vote, what you're basically doing is you're setting a stage for Republicans who are moderate. And I think of folks like Charlie Dent, who no longer serves in the House, to recognize that it's okay this go round to vote for the Democrat who's a little more mainstream. That's why someone like Josh Shapiro runs for governor in Pennsylvania. He's a Democrat. How far left is he? Not that far left. He's not, someone like, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, right? And that works. That's why Connor Lamb won that special election back in 2017. So there's a strategy here. So I thought it was brilliant. I was stunned, like you, about this reaction of, well, you're painting people with a broad brush. You go ahead and do it. Did you all not see January 6th? Anyone who went, folks, if you went to the Capitol, I have a problem with you. And I think you should be in jail, period. If you are sympathetic to people who went to the Capitol, I'm going to look at you funny. And that's a teaser, by the way, for what we're going to talk about later in this show.
Yeah.
And it makes all the sense in the world. That was a form of treason. It's mindless to me that some people would look at this and say, well, you're painting with a broad brush, deplorables, blah, blah. No. When Hillary gave that statement, she wasn't separating. She wasn't trying to break apart and bifurcate the Republicans. she basically kind of painted him on the broad brush, which partly came back and bit her on the butt.
Right. And it was, by the way, it was wrong that she said that. Let's be honest. I mean, that was wrong. She shouldn't have said that because of what ended up happening. Couple that with the Comey stuff and her not traveling to, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, I believe. And there you go. Now she's not president. But again, this I want to get back to the reason I was like, I didn't even know the speech was happening. And then everyone's talking about it. And it's because I don't get, in the context of what he was doing, which I just mentioned, going on tour, daytime speeches, workers' unions, talking about Safer America plan, right? And guns out in Wilkes-Barre. I get all that. The guy's from Pennsylvania. I get that. Campaigning for people for midterm races in different states. I just didn't get a primetime address to the nation because I agree with you. I would push back on Leslie Marshall. Wish we had Leslie on the show this time, not them, because I'm all for calling them out. I don't know if I need a primetime speech in the middle of a tour. Like, I think we just continue to harp on, and I say we, and I shouldn't say we, they should just continue to harp on the messaging part of this, right? Like, just like you said, fracture the party. We know where the moderate Republicans stand. John Kasich and guys like that, and girls like that, by the way. We've had one, Maura Gillespie, that works for Representative Kinzinger, is a perfect example, right? Like, moderate to even conservatives like Olivia Troy, that called herself a radical centrist when she was on the program. Those are not the people we're talking about. And the president was real clear in that. So I don't understand some of the Democrats that have an issue with calling out the crazies. There's crazies on this side of the party. Yeah, the crazies in the Democratic side of the party want the government to pay for everything. And they want community policing. They don't want people to have, like, they don't even want cops to have guns. That's a little crazy. Nick, you know how both of us feel. We need some police, right? We need to hold them more accountable. We need to get rid of some of these laws like the immunity. And then, we can start actually getting justice for people that are wrongly, killed by the police. But you need police. Like, you can't have me and Nick showing up to a domestic, a dispute, and then, trying to enforce justice. That's not how that works. You don't want us, right? No. You don't want us there, right? Exactly. The two of us are podcasters now, so you don't want two podcasters showing up and helping out with that. Anyway, I want to move to something else because the speech itself, I was baffled that it was happening, and again, falling in line with the tour. The ire of it from people on the Democratic side of the House, and especially a loaded question like what Martha Raddatz asked. So what? Those people live in a rabbit hole of confusion, and they're being fed all of that stuff. They're eating it up. So of course, and then the red background with, and their Let's Go Brandon stuff, like, they're eating that stuff up. They're already going to be riled up regardless of when the president speaks. It doesn't matter. They're already riled up. To continue to call out the election deniers, the ones that are running in key states, I have no problem with that. Nobody should have a problem with that because it's right and wrong. In our last segment, we're going to get into how to deal with your MAGA friend. It's part of Dear Can We Please Talk. But before we go to the break, one thing I did want to touch upon, I mentioned this at the top, a third of a major nation on this planet is underwater. If you haven't heard about the deadly monsoons and floods that are happening in Pakistan, we're going to cover a little bit of this right now because there's more than 30 million people in urgent need after these devastating floods. 135 bridges have been washed out. Nearly 500,000 homes have been destroyed. That number continues to climb. Just as of this taping, more than 1,200 people have died, and the rainy season isn't even over yet. Take a listen to this.
In Pakistan, the government says floods across the country have now killed more than 1,300 people. Rescue efforts are continuing in parts of Sindh province. It's one of the worst affected areas. There's real pressure now to rebuild all of these buildings that have been lost. Climate Change Minister Sherry Rahman said that international expertise will be needed to help make the country's infrastructure climate resilient. She's been speaking to our Pakistan correspondent, Pumza Kharani.
In Pakistan, where there was very little climate literacy, it's been a real uphill task. But this year has brought so many cascading calamities, one after another, that naturally people ask, what is it that we're doing wrong?
That was from BBC News. I did want to say the correspondent that they mentioned there, Pumza Falhani, she was actually supposed to be on the show with us in this segment talking about this, but unfortunately, due to some communication issues that were happening over there in Pakistan, we weren't able to get her on the program today. We hope to get her in the coming weeks, because we really want somebody that's on the ground covering this to talk about this. But you just heard Sherry Rahman, I believe I'm saying her name wrong, Pakistan's climate change minister. By the way, a climate change minister, Nick, do you know of one that lives here in the U.S. cabinet? I don't know of any, but they should have that. What happened basically in Pakistan, this is their worst climate-induced natural disaster in years, record torrential rainfall, excuse me. And then there's melting glaciers in the country's northern mountains that have led to this contribution. And like I said, close to a third of the country is underwater. There are, I think, about 300,000 plus people that are displaced right now from their homes. In our show notes link, we're going to have a link to the International Rescue Committee, which is helping with donations over at the help.rescue.org /Pakistan. But we will have the URL in our, and by the way, URL is Tech Talk, but the website link, we will have that in our show notes there, because this is a huge issue that's happening not only for the people that are living there. Obviously, we've had Amna Nawaz on this program who is Pakistani, and she was covering this as well for PBS's News Hour. I know this hits her personally. She mentioned when she was on a show with us of the times that she's gone back to Pakistan as a little kid. Nick, just real quick before we go to break here, for everything that's happening in that region of the country, of the world, for the people of Pakistan there, some of your reactions. We were texting back and forth about this before, and we've talked about climate change on this program, man. This thing is real, and here's a nation that's really, really going through it.
Yeah. I mean, we just right now think about the people in Pakistan. As you said, Mike, like this is part of it, the ongoing trend. Something from Bloomberg that stands out is rainfall this year is running at currently an average of 780% above average levels. This is from from the climate change minister we just talked about. You think about just a significant amount of rainfall, because one of the things that we had been reading about is that with this amount of rainfall coming, it's just basically rising water levels. And it's just essentially any type of land formation, either, human created or just natural, the water level is just exceeding it. So it just basically bleeds over into communities, and it just basically floods everything to the tune of people dying and people being displaced in their homes. This just seems to point to evidence again of a shift in the climate. Climate change can sometimes be a loaded term, but fundamentally what we're saying is that the planet continues to change. There are weather patterns that are abnormal. I just said it, 780% higher than their typical average rainfall in that country. Their infrastructure can't sustain it. So on the one side of it, this is a humanitarian crisis. On the other side of it, this is yet another piece of evidence of a global trend that we're seeing. And we just keep coming back to that. How many more pieces of evidence do you need before this comes to your footsteps, all of us as a global community, as humanity, before we recognize we have to do something? There's hope. I hear, obviously we know what's going on in California, the movement away from gas powered automobiles, over by 2020, 2035, 2030, according to Governor Newsom, hopefully. There's efforts, right? The G7, talked about this last year, but that's not helping the people in Pakistan right now. So, however people can help and support the humanitarian efforts, please do so. But at the same time, recognize that the planet continues to change, and we're seeing another sad piece of evidence to point to that.
Yeah, Pakistan's climate change prime minister, climate change minister mentioned that they're going to need help from U.S., Qatar, Turkey, because, and this is her quote, "We neither have the money nor the technical capacity." Boy, you hate hearing that, and I feel for friends of mine that have family out there in Pakistan. Like I mentioned, we'll have a link in our show notes there that you can help donate financial relief to the International Rescue Committee to help the people of Pakistan with the deadly floods that are happening there. When we come back after the break, our Dear Can We Please Talk segment, a new segment to the show, this time dealing with how to deal with your MAGA friend. Back after the break. Our show is brought to you by the good folks at Fresh Roasted Coffee, freshroastedcoffee.com since 2009, making quality coffee at an amazing, affordable price. Hit the link right now in our episode description, and you can get a discount on this amazing coffee for being a listener and watcher of Can We Please Talk. All right, Nick, we came up with this idea for Dear CWPT, Dear Can We Please Talk, similar to Dear Abby, if you remember the column back in the day, where people would write in and we try to solve your problems. And this came to me because somebody actually wrote into the show and they were asking us about a conversation that they had with somebody and the level of brainwashing that happened with this person. I'm going to read you a little bit of this. And then at the end, there's a question, right? Like, how do you guys deal with people like this? I listen to your show all the time. How do you guys deal with this? So here's what the person said. I forget. Here's a pearl of Trump wisdom. The person I was talking to said Trump has a plan to make everybody who's not supposed to be here go back to their countries. And I was like, really? And the person continued, all these people that are not supposed to be here will have to go back to their countries if they want to get their taxes back. So if you want your tax refund, you have to go back to your country first. And I was like, wow, I know a lot of people who are here on a work visa, pay social security taxes, and went back to their countries. How's that going to work out? They're going to get their taxes back too. And she said, yeah, the Treasury Department has it all figured out. They actually already know everything. So we don't have to worry. We're all going to get, and she means we all, like domestic folks, people that are US citizens, are all going to get a really big fat refund once Trump comes back into office. Um, uh, and the person at the end of this said, this breaks my heart to hear a hardworking person saying this with all her heart, that she believes this BS. And the question at the end of it was, how do you guys deal with something like this? Like, how do you guys deal with people that are, and I hate using the term brainwashed, because brainwashed is, if you ever watch a documentary that's always around a cult leader, that's commonly where the term is used, right? And whether or not Donald Trump is, former President Donald Trump is a cult leader or not, that's up to people that have studied cults. I leave that to experts. I'm not an expert in studying cults. I've watched a bunch of documentaries. I've even sat in on shooting of one, but I don't know enough about it to say whether or not that's a cult. I think there are people that voted for former president because he just happens to have an R next to his name, and they have an R next to their name, according to FEC.gov. So we leave it at that. But here's what I will say about dealing with your MAGA friend. We're each going to take a turn on this, on how you would deal with a MAGA friend. I currently, right now, don't have any MAGA friends. I have chosen purposely to cut those people out of my lives. And some people, I think I mentioned this, if you go back and listen to our American Radical episode with Ayman Mohideen, I've mentioned personal family members. I'm talking like intimate family members, right? Like cousins, sisters, like not my sister, but she's not like that. But you know what I mean? Like people at that level where that's it. Sky is blue, the sun is yellow. You believe something else, there's an ecosystem over there, and you can go live in that ecosystem. And do me a favor, don't be around my kids, because I don't want my kids to not learn. And again, not Mike Leon's facts, not Nick Savari's facts, actual facts. The sky is blue and the sun is yellow. You believe in other things, go over there, live in that ecosystem, live in that world, however siloed you want it to be. That's the beauty of this country, right? You're allowed to be stupid, unfortunately. And I think the big key is, if in the question that she was asking there, she's dealing with somebody on a business level, right? Like it sounded like from the email, like maybe there's some like business transaction or exchange happening between them. Maybe like she's a realtor or something like that. And like, so she's talking to this person, trying to find out information. This person, kind of segues into this stuff. So how do I deal with that person? In that scenario, always give questions to get more out of it, is how I would do it. Similar to how you see police detectives try to lead somebody into actually, falling into the trap, right? Lead them into it, ask them some more questions. Oh, so where did you read that from? Well, where did you see that? Cite me the source, right? Similar to why we started this show. I've mentioned this a bunch of times during the pandemic. This is why we started the show. Texted Nick, heard some crazy things from people in Florida. And I said it then, and I'll say it again. It's because they're lazy based on their search habits. Every answer was, I saw this on Facebook. It was from a Candace. And you know who the Candace is right after that? It's Owens, right? And that's not a news source. That's not a credible journalist, commentator, anything. That's not any of that. She's not any of that. Never worked for a news agency, not a reporter, not a correspondent, doesn't work in any government official positions. No, she's just somebody that believes in one particular thing, continues to harp on it, knows that money is to be made off of that, and has built a small empire off of that. Nick and I don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. That's why we live in the proverbial middle. Whether or not you believe that we're in the middle is another thing, but we do live here. And I know that because we don't make the kind of money that those people make off of this. Not yet. So going back to the overarching theme here, before I let you go, Nick, dealing with your MAGA friend. I don't deal with them. I have cut them out of my life. I don't have time for people that don't believe in right, wrong, fact, fiction. I don't have time for it. Whether or not you believe in President Trump as the person you're going to vote for because of like economic issues and you want him back in office, that's fine. But if you believe, and again, that's fine. I don't agree with that, but again, that's fine. But if you believe in elections stolen, if you believe in he'll be back next week, if you believe in like what Mike Lindell, my pillow guy, believes in, again, there's a silo for you over there. It's on Newsmax and OAN. You can live over there. Don't be around me. And more importantly, please don't be around my kids. That is the big thing for me. I have cut those people out of my life. In terms of day-to-day interaction, and I've mentioned this before, how we're shooting something on the Latino vote. And I've done a series of interviews with different people that do believe in that. It's the getting the information out of them. Where'd they get that from? Citing that source. Is it credible? Is it reputable? Right? And then at the end of the day, all you can do is, similar to the court of law, present the facts and the argument, and then let them decide. If they still don't believe it, they're gone. And similar to like how I mentioned to Ayman Mohideen, should we care about that person and try to retrieve them? My answer is no. His answer was, proceed with caution, right? At your own peril, because that person could come back. And what happened on January 6th could happen at a bigger scale. Give me some of your takeaways on that email that we got in from somebody. And how would Nick Savary deal with a MAGA friend?
Yeah. Are you allowed to say the first name of that person or no?
It says Anna here.
Okay.
In the email.
Anna, first and foremost, thank you for writing our show. We encourage all of you to do that. Can't we please talk podcast at gmail.com. Remember, Gmail, not Yahoo. Mike, similar to you, it's funny. I'm trying to like go through the Rolodex in my head. I'm not on Facebook anymore. I mean, I use Messenger for like different groups and stuff, but Facebook used to be the place I would see, friends of mine or people who are just pretty much just Facebook associates, I guess, at this point, and post the crazy stuff they do. And I guess that's how I would know where people are with these things. I don't use it anymore. There's a friend that I still consider him a friend. I just don't associate with him. And it's someone that Mike knows as well, someone we knew from college. And I don't talk to him anymore. And his was an interesting story because he really turned after he met his wife, funny enough. I saw this because the version of the person I knew prior to marrying this woman was just different. But funny enough for him, where things really took a weird turn was after September 11th. The documentary Loose Change had come out, a couple of years after, had made this whole argument about the Bush administration been responsible for the destruction of the Twin Towers, and really just distorted and uncomfortable and creepy stuff, really. And he just kind of went down that rabbit hole, and honestly, he never came out of it. To the point where I would have other friends of mine, pull these clips from Facebook and show, like, look what he's writing. This is wow. But some people found that funny, and I never did. I found it sad. I found a person who I cared about, who I considered a friend, just really spiraled down a rabbit hole. And you ask yourself at that moment, what is the role you have here? Do you want to try to salvage the relationship, or do you sort of let it erode like, what are your options? Folks, like Mike, I'm in my 40s. I'm married with 2 kids. Friendship is a funny thing to me now. Like, I'm good with the friends I have. I don't need to salvage any relationships. I'm a parent, so first and foremost, my job is to raise my daughters and to be a good husband. So I'm not in my 20s anymore. I'm not worried about trying to salvage friendships because I feel like I need these people. I don't the barrier for me is pretty easy to determine whether it makes sense to associate with someone. And quite honestly, it really comes down to, how do they make you feel? Like, if they're providing a negative form of energy that comes really from being MAGA. I mean, Mike, you brought up the documentary or the podcast series that American Radical that Eamon had helped produce. And it talked, I remember a lot of the interviews about this person who had gone to the Capitol on January 6th, and everyone just saw the same thing. This person had taken a distorted view and got far more aggressive about it. And some people started to maintain their distance. Some, like her family, were nervous for her and obviously sad when she died. But there was a distance that forms. And that's the same thing for me. I really would struggle with trying to maintain that relationship. It's a different conversation if we're talking about family, but in terms of a friend, I don't find value in trying to salvage something when a person's worldview is so distorted that it's not worth saving. I mean, this crazy stuff. Go ahead and say it in front of my daughters. I mean, I'll clown you for doing so, but that's really the extent of it. But yeah, to me, it's not worth saving. Now, professionally, I will offer that that's a conversation you got to have with yourself. That right. In a business relationship, is this just something you don't talk about? And are you okay? Are you professionally okay with not considering that in a business relationship? Is this really about revenue? Is this about developing a partnership that in your business long term is beneficial to you, just from a revenue standpoint and maybe a brand visibility? And I'll stop there. My wannabe MBA talk. But no. But these are the questions you ask yourself, right? But in short, no. As a friend, no. Mike, I'm like you. I've cleaned my cupboard of people who would be sympathetic toward MAGA. And honestly, as I say all this, I'm a little sad because I do remember the friend I had once who, once he sort of turned to the MAGA side, I guess I'm being facetious here. Right. I did not find it to be a friendship worth salvaging.
I'm so glad, by the way, you brought up the professional stuff. As you hear the music here, we get ready to sign off. But the professional stuff, it is true, though. Like, I'm sure there are people at both of our jobs that may lean conservative, Republican, whatever it is. And that is fine. That's not what we're talking about here. That is not what we're talking about here. Court of law, right, wrong. Those are things that we're talking about. Fact versus fiction. You want to live in the fiction world. There's tons of spaces for that. You can be in that world. And even if it meant business and costing me, luckily my boss over at SAS Perform agrees with a lot of the views that I have. But it's also not about my view or Nick's view. It's about facts and information, not your facts, not my facts, actual facts. And that's what we try to do on this program as best as we can each and every week. We leave it there on that segment. Like I said, write us in, canwepleasetalkpodcast@gmail.com, like Nick said, or even the Yahoo one. I think it's still working, but DM us. You can text Nick and I if you have our numbers, but email us for sure, and we'll read more of these. If you've got a question, comment, concern, not only about the show, but something you want us to talk about, we'd love to talk about it more. Video, YouTube, check out our YouTube channel. Can We Please Talk? Type that in there in the YouTube. You can check out some of the great interviews we just posted recently. Shout out to Tim Meehan, our producer, the Matthew Brown interview. So go check out WAPO's Democracy Reporter there on all the legal troubles that are happening right now for former President Trump. Audio podcast platforms, you know them by now, Apple, Spotify, Google. Wherever you get your podcast, leave us a 5-star review and comment, please. Shout out to Acast, our hosting platform. We can't do it without them. And I always come back to you guys and gals out there. We can't do it without each and every one of you that listens to this program each and every week. We're so thankful and appreciative. No episode on Monday, but we'll be back next week. Got some fantastic guests lined up in the next couple of weeks. As always, I am Mike Leon.
Not a fan of the crown, but in awe of the woman. May she rest in peace to Queen Elizabeth II. And DC is happening, folks. Hope to see some of you all there. I'm Nick Saveri.
That's right. To October 27th. See everybody next time. Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it. And we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.